While everything in Ukraine is collapsing, the front lines, the economy, the energy industry, Zelensky's power, I hear some people in Russia say, serves you right. You sold out. You deserve this. But these people don't fully understand what they're talking about. A simple question. Do you know the current average age of Ukrainian armed forces soldier? 47 years. Why do you think that's so? Write the answer in the comments. Let's see who's thinking in the right direction. It's been 47 years since Ukraine has started disposing of men who lived in the Soviet Union and still remember how good and peaceful life was in one united state. Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians. Does that sound harsh to you? I'm not the only one saying this, the numbers are. Meanwhile, those who sold out or betrayed live comfortably, shielded from mobilization, earning a lot of money. How it turned out that a small group of people managed to drag such a large country into war. What were ordinary Ukrainians thinking? How does Western propaganda work? Today, friends, we'll try to figure it out with specific examples. But let me remind you, the majority of people in Ukraine wanted peace. That's exactly why Ukrainians elected Zelensky, who promised to kneel before Putin.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I'm ready, I don't know, if you need it. I'm ready to beg you on my knees.
But once he came to power, tasting fame and money, Zelensky went all in and decided to play the role of Che Guevara. Many say Russian propaganda failed. I say it was impossible to succeed. The US has spent tens of billions of dollars on propaganda in Ukraine. No one else has such resources. In Ukraine, there isn't a single sphere, a single government institution, a single idea, or a single goal existing on its own. In my book, Inevitable, I described in detail the actions of the US, which began actively interfering in the process of Ukraine immediately after the end of World War II, back in 1945. And it wasn't just influence, but the creation or preservation of an ultra-nationalist core in Ukraine. At that time, they weren't a significant force capable of influencing the people in Ukraine. They were discredited by their collaboration with Nazis. But the US needed to form a small, yet solid foundation for a long-term game against Russia. They used various tools, financing expatriate communities and fleeing nationalists to foster the anti-Soviet sentiment. In the 1940s and early 1950s, USA, through the CIA, supported the Ukrainian insurgent army in western Ukraine. As a part of Operation Aerodynamic, they dropped agents, weapons, and propaganda materials. Here's just one fact out of many. In December of 1951, in Frankfurt am Main, representatives of the American Military Command held negotiations with the former Ukrainian People's Republic to form a 2,500-man paratrooper brigade intended to spark an uprising behind the Soviet lines. Impressive, isn't it? And of course, there's another story connected to the broadcasts of Voice of America and Radio Liberty on the territory of Ukraine in Russian and Ukrainian. They aired news, anti-Soviet propaganda, and information about life in the West. Naturally, most of it was pure lies aimed at sowing dissent. I'd like to note that employees of Voice of America and Radio Liberty have always positioned themselves as the most ardent patriots of Ukraine. Today, Donald Trump has suspended their operations, leaving many employees in the US with expiring contracts, so they will be forced to return to Ukraine. But that seems unlikely. How many of these glorious patriots do you think will come back to Ukraine? None. So far, no one has come back to the country they tried so hard to build. The full-scale takeover of Ukraine began after the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. Let's discuss just what's already been documented and proven. In 1992, after the US and Ukraine signed a bilateral agreement on humanitarian and technical assistance, USAID officially began its work. Hundreds of thousands of NGOs have been created in Ukraine with significant funding to local media, including grants to support media outlets, training programs for journalists, and investments in radio broadcasting and newspapers. Now, it's not a secret that USAID has operated as a corrupt entity, using its resources to cultivate agents of influence in countries all over the world. I've met countless beneficiaries of these organizations. There is even a university in Ukraine that was a breeding ground for such individuals, Kyiv Mohila Academy. They all share the same traits, consider themselves the smartest while being completely superficial. Apparently, that's the type they need. Of course, they were interested in the first elections in independent Ukraine's history. To help you understand how I feel about them, let me share a couple of examples. Please feel this, really feel it. Put yourself in our shoes. Dennis Beas, a blogger with an audience of about 100,000 viewers. Now it's clear that Americans gave him about $2 million a year. Just think about that, a small-time blogger and journalist. How much do you make a month? Not only was he paid $150,000 a month, he was protected from mobilization. No one cared about his viewership. Now let's be honest. Would you take $150,000 a month to smear whoever they pointed at? You have no risk of being mobilized. Western media is praising you. Everyone thinks you're a good guy. That's how it worked. With large sums of money, the U.S. bought up everyone willing to sell out. Those who refused, who held their own opinions, were banned. The agents they cultivated were unleashed to target them. There were too many of them. Over 30 years, thousands of such organizations have been set up. Only during Biden's administration, USAID poured $31 billion into Ukraine. According to Ukrainian media, 30 to 50% of the funding went to intermediaries and consultants, effectively stolen. $15 billion was stolen just there. No country in the world except the US could flood its propaganda with that amount of money. Trump understands this. That's what all of his recent actions are tied to.
There's fraud. These people are lunatics. And if they went totally crazy, what they were doing, and the money they were giving to people that shouldn't be getting it, and to agencies and others that shouldn't be getting it, was a shame. So they're tremendous fraud. But we'll be doing a report.
But let's go back to the start, to the so-called independence. USAID allocated funds to provide material and technical support for Ukraine's elections. The agency also financed the Committee of Voters of Ukraine. The CVU became one of the first organizations monitoring elections and received grants to train and educate observers. I visited their press conferences hundreds of times. Everyone treated their organization as the ultimate authority, the ones who decided whether elections were fair or not. No one even thought that it was simply election interference, since the CVU was funded directly by another state. In 1996, USAID also took part in drafting Ukraine's constitution. The official goal of the organization was to support Ukraine's civil society. The process was set in motion. Later, this funded society, not the largest one, would stage 2 revolutions in a thriving country and lead it to war. Money was given to such organizations as Pora, Student Wave, Clean Ukraine, I Know, and many others.
Public Group Para, Public Group Clean Ukraine, Student Initiative, Student Wave, declare a merger and the start of the You Can't Stop Freedom Action.
They mobilized young people, coordinated mass protests against Kuchma and Yanukovych. USAID, through its structures, controlled election observers. First, as I mentioned, there was the Committee of Voters of Ukraine. Then appeared Opora, an organization that conducted parallel vote counts and had its own network of observers. These organizations decided which elections in Ukraine were fair and which required a redo. Beyond that, USAID sponsored various sociological centers in Ukraine that conducted public opinion polls. As expected, after elections, a consortium of sociologists, the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and the Razumkov Center, would produce the necessary numbers in exit polls. They don't even hide anything. On the Razumkov Center's website, USAID is listed second among official partners. In 2004, Yanukovych officially won, but USAID-backed exit polls showed Yushchenko leading by 11%. What went next? They didn't like the election results. Yushchenko expressed distrust in the Central Election Commission and called on citizens to protest on Maidan. That's how the Orange Revolution started. They changed the government, but not for long. Yanukovych would soon return. He was again elected by the people. Then came the Revolution of Dignity, or Maidan 2014. It was a U.S.-orchestrated coup funded through USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, aimed at weakening Russia's influence in the region. Recently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., now a U.S. cabinet member, said in an interview with Tucker Carlson,
It's called the Maidan Rebellion in Ukraine, which we're not told that we are financing those riots. The newspapers never told us, our government never told us. USAID, which is a CIA front, put $5 billion into funding those riots. Those riots lead to a coup d'etat against the first democratically elected government of the Ukraine.
Here's another one of his quotes.
It was a government that refused to choose sides and to say, we're going to be on the side of the West. So we wanted them out.
Remember how it all started? Mustafa Naim wrote a post, "Bring umbrellas, tea, coffee, good vibes, and friends." Naim was a product of the system, a journalist at Ukrainian Pravda and co-founder of Hromadske, both backed by USAID grants. When the 2014 protests began, independent media sponsored by USAID shaped the narrative. USAID-funded activists filled the square, controlled courts, blocked government decisions, and anti-corruption structures financed by USAID legitimized any accusations against the authorities. Every organization, even those with just one person, received between $50,000 and $200,000. But the Committee of Voters of Ukraine got the lion's share. Those guys who controlled elections and shaped the ideological field.
We also proposed changes to the electoral legislation, propose them to deputies, lobby for them, and conduct negotiations. We don't aim to cover all the polling stations, but we have enough resources.
Even Barack Obama acknowledged U.S. influence on Maidan. In an interview with CNN, he said the U.S. acted as a broker in the transition of power in Ukraine.
Mr. Putin made this decision around Crimea and Ukraine, not because of some grand strategy, but essentially because he was caught off balance by Yanukovych then fleeing after we had brokered a deal to transition power in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, concepts were redefined. Dignity and independence were no longer about the country's prosperity, but about receiving money from the U.S. Opposition leaders were also funded by USAID. Klitschko's Udar party received funding through American foundations, with USAID being their primary source. Yatsenuk's Open Ukraine Foundation received aid from the U.S. State Department, openly listing the State Department as a partner with its emblem on their website. Yanukovych's mistake was that he couldn't expel American foundations from his country, as Putin did. In 2012, Russia kicked USAID out. Russia's foreign ministry explained the decision by saying the agency's activities in Russia didn't align with its declared objectives and instead sought to influence political processes, including elections, through grant distribution. Lukashenko did it even earlier in 1997. He faced a storm of criticism, but he saved the country. Remember Poroshenko's "live in a new way"?
We must unify the country.
The most entertaining is that after Maidan, USAID pushed for reforms that have driven Ukraine into the dire condition we see today. They gave money for everything that could lead to the collapse and degradation of Ukraine as a state. I'll give you a few examples to make it clear. Land reform. Even before the war, USAID pressed Ukraine for a land reform, in other words, to adopt a policy allowing oligarchs and foreigners to purchase its land. Let me remind you that it was necessary for Ukraine's EU membership, a goal we never achieved. By the way, despite massive public protests, Zelensky signed the land sale law. Healthcare reform. USAID funded and supported the healthcare reform in Ukraine. Minister Ulyana Suprun. People called her Dr. Death. Let me just remind you that she's actually a U.S. citizen. Suprun led a healthcare reform that destroyed free healthcare and preventative medicine. We've covered on our YouTube channel how pensioners died on benches outside of hospitals because they got turned away due to not having money.
Our team demands Suprun's resignation. People call her Dr. Death. Suprun, for example, is an absolute nightmare. As a result of this reform, the state has removed responsibility for the health of its citizens. The medical reform that has been carried out in recent years is an instrument for minimizing the number of Ukrainians on their own land. Tell me, please, if there are no high-quality medicines, if there are no affordable prices for medicines, if there are no normal conditions in hospitals, if doctors don't have normal salaries, what kind of dumb reform is this?
USAID also funded the energy reform, supposedly to improve energy efficiency. In reality, the goal was to force Ukraine to abandon cheap Russian gas. In 2014, Burisma signed a memorandum of cooperation with USAID's energy program. What a convenient alliance! a non-profit organization telling Ukrainian MPs and officials what to do, overseeing all reforms with a corrupt commercial gas company, Burisma, the one Republicans wanted to impeach Biden over. Together, they rewarded journalists who wrote about the importance of abandoning Russian gas. Ukraine's own gas production didn't pan out. But of course, that's Putin's fault.
This is not gas. This is Russia's general plan to destroy Ukraine.
The judicial reform in Ukraine was also backed by US aid, including the introduction of a competitive selection process for judges, overseen by the High Qualification Commission of Judges. During this period, Yuri Lutsenko was appointed Prosecutor General. Though it's a different branch of power, it's funny that he didn't even have a degree in law, and the Rada had to pass a special law allowing people without said degree to hold the position of the Prosecutor General.
I already have an agreement with a reanimation package of reforms on restoring the Office of Reforms of the Prosecutor General's office. There is also an agreement with the FBI representative office in Ukraine.
Here's one example. Alexander Tupetsky, head of Ukraine's constitutional court, is now hiding in Europe because he says that the president of Ukraine wants to poison him. Other judges are simply killed by drones. Anti-corruption efforts. The ProZorro public procurement system was created with USAID money under the Transparency and Accountability in Public Administration project. As always, check their website. USAID's listed as a donor. Now, most corruption runs through ProZorro. The only thing it does is lets Americans monitor it. Meanwhile, in the US, USAID is called a corrupt entity run by a bunch of radical lunatics. Elon Musk writes that USAID is a criminal organization that needs to die. It's terrifying to realize, friends. An organization labeled as universal evil oversaw nearly all key reforms in Ukraine. What kind of outcome could such an organization bring to a once thriving country? When they shut down our channels, News 1, Zik, and 112, they told us, now finally, only independent media will remain in Ukraine. Now it's clear, they left only the dependent ones. WikiLeaks revealed that 90% of Ukrainian media was founded by USAID. By law, Ukrainian channels were forced to refer to the DPR as the so-called DPR. But in the light of recent events, we should say, so-called independent Ukraine. Have a look at this headline from the Washington Post. Independent media in Russia and Ukraine lose their funding with USAID freeze. Elon Musk wrote independent media LMAO. Hilarious indeed. After funding was paused, posts started popping up online saying several Ukrainian media outlets would shut down or switch to a paid model. For example, Ukrainian Pravda had a banner like that. No deep digging required. It's written on their website that the project exists thanks to USAID. As I mentioned earlier, CIA influence tools published several articles about Me Too. Look at Reporters Without Borders, for example. That outlet's funded by USAID too. Reporters Without Borders is an organization meant to protect journalists, but instead, they harass them. Another USAID project is Internews Ukraine. Have you heard of it? It was the executor of the massive Ukraine Media Partnership Program with a $75 million budget. There are a lot of familiar names among the participants. The fact that Internews Ukraine is the executor of major media programs is ridiculous itself. From January 1st to December 31st, 2022, Internews Ukraine spent over $2 million of USAID funds. They call it their mission, promoting European values by establishing successful media. Just so you understand, their average monthly viewership is 31 views. 31. If we divide $2 million by 31 people, we see Internews spent about $65,000 to attract each viewer. Sounds efficient? Overall, $300 million was allocated for communications over 3 years. They spent it in various ways: anti-Russian propaganda, dehumanization, warmongering. No one controlled the quality. All professionals were silenced, shut down, or kicked out of the country, like me. This led to the decay and degradation of Ukrainian media. No wonder Trump saw no reports.
And we've given, let's say, 300 plus And it's more important for them than it is for us. We have an ocean in between, and they don't. But where is all the money that's been given? Where is it going? And I've never seen an accounting of it. We give hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't see any accounting.
If you thought there was anything sacred and untouchable, like your soul, your relationship to God, freedom of religion protected by any country's constitution, I'm sorry to disappoint. American NGOs got deep into that too. American lawyer Robert Amsterdam told Tucker Carlson that the U.S. State Department was directly involved in establishing and supporting the Orthodox Church of Ukraine.
The State Department of the United States was involved in the establishment of the church. I believe either USAID or some other organizations have funded this state church called the OCU. So you have our State Department violating our Constitution openly, engaging in the destruction of religious freedom in a foreign country.
5 years ago, Poroshenko created a new church in Ukraine, the OCU. He secured the Tomos and launched a mass campaign of church seizures. As it turned out, USAID-funded structures responsible for persecuting the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which was the largest and main church in Ukraine. Funded by USAID Razumkov Center, that I previously mentioned, constantly conducted sociological studies claiming that Ukrainian people actively supported the crackdown on the church. But that's a lie. Zelensky, of course, was no exception. He continued destroying the church and harassing priests. Right after the election, an interesting document appeared on the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center's website. It was an appeal to Zelensky from representatives of specific civil organizations laying out explicit expectations for his presidency. The document included a set of red lines he couldn't cross. Regarding the church, Zelensky was forbidden, I quote, any actions aimed at undermining or discrediting the Orthodox Church of Ukraine or supporting the Russian Orthodox Church. Otherwise, there'd be big problems. Among the signatories were organizations like the Institute of Mass Information, Detector Media, and the previously mentioned Internews Ukraine. USAID funded them all. And of course, they wrote about me too. Everyone USAID gave money to somehow wrote about me in unison. On the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center's website, there is a huge USAID logo among the donors. The red lines remained untouched. Zelensky continued his relentless campaign against the church and faith. Monks were expelled from the Kyiv-Pечерsk Lavra. They keep charging them with treason, banning them from work and persecuting them. That's all because they accuse them of collaborating with Moscow.
Many representatives of the UOC were caught collaborating with Russian occupiers. Do you support them? My answer is, we collaborate with God.
You think it's just about ideology? Take NGL Media, for example. They compiled the list of property owned by Ukrainian Orthodox Church priests, with the intent to seize it later. They did this under the Institute of War and Peace Reporting Project. Check their website, and here you see Internews, the International Republican Institute, and the National Democratic Institute, all USAID contractors. Sure, no one's making property lists of the monks of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Friends, USAID does tons of projects in Ukraine, practically in every sphere: economy, energy, healthcare, agriculture, cybersecurity, education, and even promotion of LGBT initiatives. Let's have a look at LGBT. All Ukrainian LGBT organizations were also funded by American foundations. On Kyiv Pride's partners page, we see USAID. Ukraine's Gay Alliance Ukraine was supported by Kyiv Pride and stopped its activity on social media at the end of 2024 after Trump's victory. They also got funding from the Arcus Foundation, which has supported LGBT movements worldwide, issuing $224 million in grants over the past 20 years. Older generations often don't see the propaganda because they're not the target audience. The target audience of the LGBT propaganda is kids. So in 2020, former Education and Science Minister Hannah Novosad, who studied abroad on a Soros Open Society Foundation scholarship, stated she'd do everything possible to make the Ukrainian school gender neutral. Online platforms like Osvitoria were established to normalize coming out among kids. Their reports say teachers should be the ones kids can confess to. On their website, Pact, a USAID subcontractor, is listed as a partner. From 2025 onward, the foundation planned to allocate about $500 million to LGBT propaganda aimed at children. They plan to finance mass print of children's books, cartoons, and shows for kids aged 5 to 12. They were also preparing to launch a special LGBT channel for kids. So, dear Ukrainians, Trump is now saving your kids from LGBT propaganda. Trump, Musk, and USAID standoff. Global structures and players used American taxpayers' money to push their propaganda and ignite wars. In other words, Soros used the US budget for his personal goals. Musk and Trump want to dismantle the entire system. But it's not that simple. U.S. federal courts are stepping in, blocking Trump administration moves against USAID. Unions are filing lawsuits, accusing the president of overreach. Protests for impeachment are already gathering under the Capitol. No one wants to lose their cushy jobs. And this is just the public fight over one organization, USAID. There are thousands like it, from the National Endowment for Democracy to an army of small NGOs. There is no clear winner yet, but there is a clear loser, the people worldwide. As for Ukraine, friends, I want to ask you, imagine a 33-year-old who's never lived by their own mind, never had their own goals, never had their own money, and managed to fall out with all of their loved ones. Could they be successful and happy in today's world? Maybe, but only if they wise up. But what if they don't? That's Ukraine in a nutshell. Friends, share your thoughts in the comments. Your support for this video means a lot to me, so don't forget to leave a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe. Peace to us all. Bye. Lastly, friends, I'll give you examples of projects no one knows about. However, they received tens of millions of dollars. Their reach is smaller than one of my Telegram posts, let alone YouTube. Yet they all became dollar millionaires. All they had to do was simply fuel hatred in Ukraine. U-Media program, $45 million. Target audience, Ukrainian residents, especially in the East, South, and Center, focusing on adults. Also journalists and editors of regional media as direct beneficiaries. Real reach. According to the Institute of Mass Information, supported media reached no more than 5 to 10% of the population in target regions. After 2025, many outlets lost even that audience due to funding cuts. Media program in Ukraine, $35 million. Target audience, Ukraine's general public, with a focus on youth, plus professional media workers for training. Goal, reach up to 20 million people via online and offline channels. Real reach. In 2024, Detector Media estimated the audience remained fragmented, with minimal youth impact who favored Telegram and YouTube over traditional media outlets. Support for Hromadske and other online platforms, $20 million. Target audience, urban intelligentsia and young professionals interested in independent journalism and investigations, mainly from Kyiv, Lviv, and Dnipro. Expected reach, 5 to 7 million unique users yearly. Real reach, per Hromadske, their monthly audience in 2023-2024 hovered around 1 million, while Ukrainian Pravda hit up to 3 million at its peak. After 2025 funding cuts, Hromadske lost up to 40% of its traffic, meaning half their traffic was inflated by paid bots. Lviv Media Forum and journalist trainings, $12 million. Target audience, professional journalists, 500 to 1,000 annually, mostly from Ukraine, including war reporters and regional correspondents. Secondary audience, their viewers and readers, up to 5 million indirectly. In reality, the forum annually gathered 300 to 700 participants. Ukrainian national identity via media, $38 million. Target audience, all segments of Ukraine's population, focusing on families, youth, and frontline residents to foster unity. Expected reach, 15 to 20 million via TV, online platforms, and cinemas. Real reach, documentaries and campaigns rarely exceeded 500,000. But to put it simply, no one needed this nonsense, of course. Think about it, friends. Just these 5 projects consumed $150 million. Yet their events only attracted a few hundred people. They never managed to impose their agenda on a broad audience.